Hi, I'm Phil the Blythe, and I'm gonna be honest, right now I spent all day shoveling yesterday, the blizzard of my lifetime, and everything hurts, and I'm dying. Look at the beautiful view from this window. The window back there is currently under a snowbank that is almost 8 feet. It's not an exaggeration. And if you hear rustling around, I'm watching my roommate's mom's dog. I'm also in a different area because I just have a knack for recording when the sun is doing funky things, and especially now when the snow is reflecting off of it, so I'm in this direction. Anyway, let's get into it. Aphrodite, Love, and War. AKA, talking about Aphrodite, a dangerous dance with YouTube's flagging algorithm. We're on this journey together, so strap in. You'll also notice I conveniently timed this video to be right before Valentine's Day. Happy Saint's Day for the saint of beekeeping, plagues, mentally ill, and oh, yeah, I guess love or something. Speaking of love, let's talk about the goddess herself, Aphrodite. So I'm actually not going to be talking about misconceptions in this video, partially because there's just so much to get through, and honestly, I feel like a lot of the misconceptions about Aphrodite can be explained away by telling you the important things, and I'll touch on a little bit of misconceptions here or there, but there's actually really not all that much myths. So these are not going to be all the myths of Aphrodite. If I talk about all the myths of Aphrodite, I would literally be here all day. I could probably make an entire series of videos covering every single myth. Instead, the ones that I'm going to be selecting are ones that had ritual or cultic importance, or just ones that I think are fundamental to understanding the goddess. So let's start where I always start, the beginning. Aphrodite Urania, Aphrodite the Heavenly, or a patronym referring to Uranus, skyfather of Kronos and king among the primordials. The most accepted birth story of Aphrodite is that after Kronos, king of the Titans, overthrew his father, he severed his baby-making bits and threw them into the ocean. Not long after, stepping out of the sea foam and onto land was the fully grown, beautiful Aphrodite. This story actually contrasts with the Iliad and the Odyssey, which depict Aphrodite as the daughter of Zeus. But the most accepted myth in our understanding and in the cultic importance of ancient Greece, she was born the moment the sky, Uranus, touched the sea. Aphrodite's loves. Now this could be its own video in and of itself. As I stated, I'm not going to be covering every single one of Aphrodite's loves, not even all the ones that are covered in the Homeric hymn. Helen of Sparta, Paris of Troy, and the start of the Trojan War. Many of us are familiar with this story. Helen ran off with Paris, and a long, epic fight to bring her back is chronicled in the events of the Iliad. Some of you might even know Aphrodite's hand in this matter. Love and war, as we will find, are intimately connected in the ancient Greek world. But let me tell you this sordid tale from the beginning.
So here's a story from A to Z.
In fair Mount Ida, where we lay our scene, there was a wedding. Thetis and Peleus, the parents of Achilles, were having the wedding of the ages. Every god and goddess, even every daemon and nymph, all beings divine were invited. Except for one. Enter Eris, personification of discord. She showed up anyway, and with her she brought a present, a golden apple inscribed with the phrase, "For the most beautiful." She tossed it into the wedding, and as you can imagine, a Denny's parking lot level brawl ensued between the goddesses. In the scramble, 3 goddesses won out in the vie for the championship. They were Hera, Athena, and of course, Aphrodite. Now Zeus refused to get involved in the matter, as was probably quite wise of him, so he sent down Hermes to Earth to find a mortal to break this tie. And who does Hermes, full of wiles, find? He finds the lovely Paris. Each of these 3 goddesses promises something in return for his vote. And Aphrodite, what does she offer? You might already be one step ahead of me. She offers the most beautiful woman on earth, and her sister, Helen of Troy. Paris and Helen were among some of Aphrodite's most favorite mortals. Adonis. Some of you might be familiar with the tale of Adonis and Aphrodite, especially when it comes to discussions about Aphrodite versus Persephone. Now, I'm going to lay this out right here. There is no historical basis at all for Aphrodite being pitted against Persephone. In fact, there are several temples where they were honored together. When you look at the actual myth of Adonis, you will realize, if anything, the myth is pitting Artemis against Aphrodite, not Persephone. The whole you can't worship Aphrodite and Persephone at the same time is entirely based on sexism. Here she is, she's making a little racket down here. There is no historical basis to that. It's just the sexism of, ooh, women versus other women over man. And people who say that need to knock it off. Honestly, if a love story gone wrong was a reason for the gods not to be worshipped together, you could literally worship none of the gods together, so. Now that that's out of the way, the tale of Adonis begins. Before this death, and even before his birth, begins with the tale of Hippolytus. Hippolytus was a young, beautiful man who revered Artemis. He revered her so much that he swore off sexuality and any erotic desire, and decided to live in service of Artemis as a virgin his whole life. Now Aphrodite took this as a personal slight. And through a series of events, Hippolytus was eventually murdered through the meddling of Aphrodite. Artemis then declares that she will fire her arrows down upon the mortal whom Aphrodite loves the most. Enter Myrrha. Now, I'm not going to go into detail about this myth because, quite frankly, it's pretty gross. But basically, long story short, Myrrha, in some versions of the myth, slights Aphrodite. We're not given really details on this, just that it happened. Pippa, can you... She's walking around in the circle, you can see her. See her right here. And Aphrodite, ever the vengeful goddess, made Myrrha fall in love with her own father. As a result of this, Adonis was born, and Myrrha was turned into a tree. Well, she was actually turned into a tree first, and then Adonis was born, but I'm not gonna get into that. And, unfortunately for Aphrodite, this continued this cycle of... and she fell in love with Adonis. In order to keep Adonis safe, she gave him to Persephone to watch over him in his boyhood. Now, Persephone saw Adonis, who was considered the most beautiful man to ever have lived, and she ended up falling in love with him. Thus, a dispute began, was quickly resolved. Zeus solved the dispute by declaring that Adonis would spend 1/3 of his time with Persephone, 1/3 of his time with Aphrodite, and 1/3 with whoever he chose. Who he ended up choosing was Aphrodite. Now, this next bit has several different variations depending on who is telling the story, but all of them end like this. Someone or something, or just fate itself, sent a boar, which then killed Adonis. Sometimes in certain myths it just happens to be wandering, but in other cases it goes back to Hippolytus and Artemis, in which Artemis gets her revenge and kills the mortal whom Aphrodite loves the most. Still, in other ones, it is Ares who feels jilted at Aphrodite's love for a mortal man. This myth has quite a bit of cultic importance, and I will cover it more in the section I do on festivals for Aphrodite, specifically the Adonia. Divine lovers. What about Aphrodite's divine lovers? The most detailed divine relationship Aphrodite has is that she is married to Hephaestus but has an adulterous love affair with the god of war Ares. Ares and Aphrodite had a couple of notable and important children: Deimos, fear; Phobos, panic; and, very much the odd one out, Harmonia, harmony. Scholars have analyzed their divine children, with Ares as being very symbolic of her joining of love and war. Another divine lover, not as well known in myth, but I would say of equal cultic importance, is that of Hermes. Some scholars see Aphrodite as a transitory goddess moving between sea and sky, immortal and mortal, which is very much the same for the winged foot messenger Hermes. Aphrodite and Hermes were frequently found together in dedications and art. They had a temple together. In fact, Hermes and Aphrodite had a child that bore both of their names, Hermaphroditus. Might sound familiar to a word that is now considered quite passé, but that word goes back to Hermaphroditus, who is the child of Hermes and Aphrodite, a bi-gender god who represents both male and female sexuality in the binary that the ancient Greeks understood. Escorts and Entourage. Aphrodite is depicted in pottery statues as well as in poetry with several different divine escorts, entourages, and retinues. The most notable would be the Graces and the Hours. The Graces and the Hours are daemoni, manifestations of concepts, not to be confused with demons. Could probably do a whole video on the difference between daemon and demon and how we got from one to the other, but that's not for this video. The Graces are also called the Deities and were personifications of everything wonderful and sublime: beauty, adornment, happiness, mirth, relaxation, dance, and celebration. And the Hours, also called the Horai, are a bit of a unique situation. Some people also call them the seasons, but all we know is that Horai is a specific time. It's a delineated specific time. Some scholars have suggested that each one represented the peak of a prime of a certain time designation, so midday or spring as the primes of their respective time measurement. I'll probably do whole videos on the Graces and the Horai because they don't get a lot of love in the modern day, but they were really well respected by the working folks of ancient Greece, especially the Horai. Aphrodite is also escorted by the Nereids. I talked a bit about this in my nymphs video. The Nereids are sea nymphs, and naturally Aphrodite being so closely associated with the sea, as well as sexuality and beauty, which nymphs are both known for, make these good candidates for her entourage. And finally, one of her most famous divine escorts is the Erotes, specifically Eros, who is the Greek god or daemon, and the personification of sexuality and lust. He was later on called a name that we see plastered everywhere this time of year: Cupid. There are many, many, many other myths and loves and etc. of Aphrodite, but those are the only ones that I'm going to mention. If you'd like to see more, I will link theoi.com. Specifically, there are links to primary sources on Aphrodite's myths, origins, and syncretizations. Again, there is no 100% definition of where Aphrodite as a goddess first emerged. Some people think that she's an indigenous Cypriot goddess. This is believed by many ancient historians as well, given that one of her most important cult sanctuaries takes place on Paphos on the island of Cyprus. And other scholars, usually the Victorian variety, say that she was a Proto-Indo-European dawn goddess, given the similarities perceived between Aphrodite and Eos, the Greek goddess of the dawn. One of the most accepted theories, however, is that she arose from goddesses of Western Asia and Mesopotamia. She shares many similarities with Astarte, a Phoenician and Canaanite goddess of love and war, who is in turn directly influenced by the cult of Inanna, a Sumerian goddess of love and war, and Ishtar, an Assyrian, you guessed it, goddess of love and war. The arguments for these origins and syncretisms are pretty convincing, and many of the puzzling aspects of Aphrodite's worship, her relation to war, as an example, can be traced back to one of these three goddesses. Most scholars who have not accepted Aphrodite's origins in Phoenicia agree that there was at least substantial influence. It appears that some of the more warrior-like aspects of Aphrodite faded away as she was Hellenized, except in certain city-states like, one would expect, Sparta.
This is where we fight!
Additionally, the myth of Adonis is a direct parallel to the myth of Inanna and Tammuz, and Adonis's name itself derives from the Canaanite Adon, meaning Lord, which you might also recognize from the Hebrew word Adonai, which also means Lord. No matter where she came from, it is pretty clear that Aphrodite was a fairly late addition to the so-called Olympian pantheon, and unlike our difficulties with Hestia, the Venus that we understand today is nearly inseparable from Aphrodite. This is not a video about Venus, so I won't get into her origins specifically. She was very important to the Roman Empire, and the mother of all Romans, but the cult of Aphrodite was so ingrained to the cult of Venus, it's quite hard to find out who Venus was before Aphrodite. Domains. Aphrodite in many ways is considered the most beloved by all mortals. She is Aphrodite Pandemos, Aphrodite of all the people, a sacred Aphrodite, especially in Greek colonies. Pandemos was also how she was celebrated as a political force. Sea and sky. Another important aspect of her was Aphrodite Urania, heavenly Aphrodite. This was a common theme shared by all three goddesses of love and war. Many bore the title Queen of Heaven, for example. Birds were also sacred to Aphrodite as a symbol of sexuality and intermediaries between the divine and mortals like her. Aphrodite was considered to be the very force of nature itself, called in poetry as the mother of wild things. It is no surprise that she's also sacred to sailors, and many sailors had portable shrines on their ships for Aphrodite's various epithets of the sea, which I will pop up right here for you now. And she was prayed to for safe voyages and protecting island or coastal city-states. Love and sexuality. The name Aphrodite has become synonymous with love and sexuality, with the word aphrodisiac coming from her name directly. She controls the love and sexuality of every living thing according to the ancient Greeks. Sometimes the sexuality manifested itself as madness, in which people were overcome with desire, wreaking all sorts of disasters, as we see from mythology. Aphrodite was also the protector of sex workers. Many sex workers dedicated their hair, jewelry, mirrors, oils to her, and she was considered their patron. Harm one of them and Aphrodite will come for you. As we have seen from myth, she is not shy from wreaking her vengeance. Beauty and adornment. As I just mentioned, mirrors were dedicated to her, and many mirrors in ancient Greek were found depicting the Cypria goddess. Aphrodite was considered the goddess of beautification, and thus fragrant oil jars, as well as combs, were dedicated to her. She was also closely associated with adornment, depicted wearing magnificent jewelry, clothes, and girdles. Not the kind of girdles that your grandma might have worn, but girdles that are kind of this thing, the thing that people call harnesses. It's not a harness, it's a girdle. War. One of Aphrodite's most perplexing epithets is Areia. Aphrodite Areia, sometimes called Aphrodite the Warlike or Aphrodite of Ares, is looked at within two lenses. It could simply be that Aphrodite is the consort of Ares, like some people view Urania as merely a patronym for her father Uranus. The story is likely a bit more complex. I know, shocker, nuance. Some of the oldest depictions of Aphrodite we have is of her bearing arms and weapons. And as I mentioned, all of the goddesses that likely influenced her, or ones that she directly came from, were all goddesses of love and war. It is generally understood, however, that this warlike aspect of her was downplayed in Athens, where most of our writing comes from. To no one's surprise, however, Areia was her most commonly honored aspect in Sparta. Festivals. Despite her widespread and cultic importance, Aphrodite had very few actual noted festivals, and even fewer ones that were state-accepted. Now, one of those festivals that was celebrated was in a pan-Hellenic manner, but not a state manner, was the Adonia, which I alluded to earlier. Okay, we're gonna move. The sun is following me. Okay. I feel like I'm doing a dance with Helios here, trying to figure out where the sun is gonna be best. Whatever, it's over. Oh, hi Helios. The Adonia was a women's-only festival, in which women would grow fast-growing crops, let them spring up overnight, and then climb up onto the rooftop, leave them out, and let them be killed by the hot sun. This would then symbolize the death of Adonis. The women would then mourn very openly for this, tear their hair, tear their clothes, weep. And then it is thought that the night concluded with likely some sort of partying. Men were quite bewildered by the Adonia festival, and it's quite funny to read some of the things that they had to say about it. And the Adonia was quite prolific amongst women of all classes, which is quite unique. Probably her most notable and officially recognized festival is Aphrodisia. Aphrodisia took place during the middle of summer in Athens, but was recognized almost pan-Hellenically. Unfortunately, not much is known about the festival, except that it likely included the sacrifice of a dove to purify the temple. When it was celebrated in Cyprus, it probably included some sort of mystery rites. Modern worship. Aphrodite is actually what brought me to Hellenic polytheism. If you checked out my From Fundamentalist to Hellenic Polytheist, which I'll link up here, I talked a bit about this as well as in my nymphs video. Many years ago, I considered myself a sea witch, and I came to Aphrodite through the Nereids. I had a connection with the Nereids on a beach in South Carolina, and almost immediately afterward, Aphrodite entered my life. Despite love and sexuality being her primary domains, there are people who have practiced with her for whom those things are not important. I myself am on the ace spectrum, and so tend to engage in other aspects of Aphrodite. I personally keep all my makeup, jewelry, and hair care products on her altar. Aphrodite has also helped me a lot with self-love and acceptance of my own beauty. Pippa! Pepita! This little rascal. Alright. Aphrodite also helped me a lot with self-love and finding my own my own inner beauty. I have met people who are not Hellenic polytheists who celebrate Aphrodite Urania, the heavenly, as queen of all things and progenitor of the universe. I also celebrate her ties to the sea, as the sea is a really deeply special thing in my life, as I'm sure it is for a lot of you. You can even see her connection to joy and celebration in general with her retinue of the Graces. Aphrodite can be a deity that is easier to begin to worship, given that she has power over many things that we enjoy. In fact, my first altar to Aphrodite was literally just a candle I'd melted into a seashell. I also sometimes honor Helen as a heroine. Here is my hero worship video, my most recent video. I usually make those offerings to Helen on Aphrodite's altar, given their intimate connection. I find that there's so much more to Aphrodite than just romance, which can feel alienating for those of us who are aromantic or asexual. Obviously, it's a big part of who she is, and if that is important to you, then bully for you, but even to those of us who those things are not important, Aphrodite is still a wonderful goddess with many things to offer. Aphrodite is the mighty power of the sea. She is the expanse and beauty of the sky. She is the glue that binds all of nature together. She deals in the realms of friends and foes. She's beauty and vengeance. She's the mightiness and overpowering nature of emotions, and the way they can bring us closer together. This is Aphrodite, and I hope that you will find something in here that resonates with you. And until next time, remember, you have what it takes to start. Alright, and goodbye.